Are you ready for part 2 of our conversation about the ways feedback impacts student learning? In today's episode, we're diving into the heart of teaching, empowering students to take ownership of their learning through the power of reflection and formative assessment. Formative isn't just not for marks. In part 2, we welcome back Darla, a thoughtful educator and assessment lead who's on a journey to purposefully create an engaging and reflective learning environment. We'll continue to explore ways to shift the responsibility of learning from teacher to student by grounding feedback in clear success criteria, modeling reflection strategies, and using tools like progress charts and Edsby to keep everyone, students, teachers, and parents, on the same page. Darla shares practical examples of how to make feedback actionable, why student agency is a game changer, and how formative assessment not only drives learning, but shapes the next steps for both students and teachers. Make sure to hit play and join us as we unlock the potential of feedback to ignite growth and agency in every learner. Let's rejoin the conversation. Welcome to Northeast Voices, a podcast that spotlights the innovators and change makers in education. We're here to share the stories of inclusion, empowerment, and the impactful connections with the Northeast School Division and beyond, focusing on the pivotal role of students, families, and teachers. Join us as we dive into the conversations revealing the strategies and moments shaping the future of education. Any Voices is your platform for inspiration and connection and is recorded in the Northeast School Division, sharing the land of Treaties 4, 5, 6, and homeland of the Métis in Northeast Saskatchewan. Be sure to subscribe and join our community of innovators and change makers. Let's get started. Thinking as we kind of shift out of that formative and summative conversation back into what it looks like in your classroom, when students start with you at the beginning of the year, do you have some conversation about what to expect or the routines? How do you go about building that routine where the student takes that feedback, they go to their progress tracker, or they use their notebook? Tell us a little bit about what it looks like in your classroom.
So I think that's a conversation that we have starting on day one. When we talk about assessment, I always talk about assessment as being a shared responsibility. So between both the student and myself, and that the whole purpose of assessment is to use the information to learn. And we try to remain that is our guiding lights when we talk about assessment and getting feedback and even numbers. Our goal is always to learn. And so we set up our notebooks, and the first couple of times that they receive feedback, or even if we have a conversation and that's something that I'd like them to put into their progress charts, we spend a lot of time talking about what feedback looks like. So a circle might be feedback, a check mark might be feedback. There might be a written comment on there. It might refer you to something in your notes, but being able to describe what we've done well just by looking at the things that are there for us, listening to what is offered to us, being able to identify what it is that we need to work on. And I go through that with them. That's a step by step process. It takes some practice to talk about, okay, here's what looks well or looks like a strong point, or here's something that we might need to focus on. And then I model with them, okay, here's how I might write this down in my progress chart. And then here are some strategies that I would specifically use to be able to move myself forward. And in addition to that, whenever we start a unit, our goal is always to talk about the learning outcome. What is our goal at the end of this? And so we always spend time looking at our rubric and our outcome and what is the criteria, what is it that we need to achieve by the end of our learning. And our criteria and our rubric is what helps guide things that we can do to move ourselves forwards. And
And
again,
I
that takes practice. Yeah.
Yes, and I appreciate that because it's not learning to use that feedback and ground in. I appreciate that you said ground in those success criteria, which is directly from the curriculum. that takes practice. We have to learn how to do that. And you talked about you introduce that, you step into that with what does feedback look like. You model that, you do talk alouds. I'm sure the students practice with each other, and it's an
Yes.
ongoing process. So as you move through the semester or through the year, depending on the grade that you're teaching, I would imagine you start to see the shifts happening more and more as they start to make more connections. They start to see how pieces work together. You talked about using strategies. And so those would be things that you have talked about in class. So they're referencing things that they have. Maybe just if you want to chat
Correct.
about that a little bit.
One of the suggestions might be for the students to justify their solution using math vocabulary. So then the strategy could be I might suggest to them, okay, if you go back into find your vocabulary for this unit, go back to your notes on similar figures, whatever it is that we're working on, and practice writing out your justification. Or perhaps a strategy might be that you need to create some flashcards to become more familiar with the vocabulary, but something that's actionable that you can do instead of just saying try harder.
Yes, because try harder, we would all try harder, but
For
to
sure.
know,
Yeah.
like, what does try harder look like or what does it mean? So I think that those are valuable skills that are not just for math or science or ELA or any of the subjects they take. That is a life skill to be able to
You're
take
learning.
feedback. Right. Yeah, to take feedback from an employer or from a coach and say, "Okay, what is my next step?" Or when do I need clarification on my next step? Or I need to go back and review something, and I can do that. I have the ability to go back and use the tools, use my notes, talk to someone to figure out where I have some challenges, where I'm working on that, and then I can use that to spring forward. So you talked about grounding in the criteria. So in the Northeast School Division, we unpack the outcomes. So the outcomes come from the curriculum, which is developed by the Ministry of Education in Saskatchewan. We unpack the outcomes together as a group of teachers so that we have lots of conversations about what does it mean? What do these students need to know, do, and understand? And then we look at in the rubrics, which are more our newer rubrics are more about learning continuum with a little bit of a rubric across the top. And then we have bullet points under, for example, FM, which is what is proficiency. And we would say these are the must do, can't fails. These are the things that we all agree as teachers that students need to demonstrate to help us understand. Now, sometimes those are pretty straightforward depending on the curriculum. Sometimes they
Agreed.
still need to be unpacked in the classroom with students into what we talk about as success criteria. So, if it says justify your solution, what does that actually look like? And in this context, what does that actually mean? It's a sentence answer. I need to show all of my work. I need to use certain types of skills and strategies that we've learned in math, and how do I apply them? So that criteria is really important in creating that target that we're all working towards. And then that's what we're grounding against with our feedback. Is my feedback going to help me step closer to this? So it keeps us on track and focused in that direction. So if I was to come into a math class, say my grade 9 math with my daughter, what would I see students doing around the classroom that would sort of maybe be slightly different, or I would recognize as the students are engaging in that feedback or that reflecting process?
So I think the progress chart would probably be number one. They also engage with their parents and me through Edsby as well. And so part of, I guess I'm jumping back kind of to my journey in this whole thing. Part of my struggle was always, okay, I know that I need to give them more feedback. They need to have these opportunities to use the feedback, but I'm also required to report to the parents and tell their families about how they're doing in school. What is it that we're doing in school? But I couldn't figure out a way where this was not cumbersome on me as the teacher to somehow type an email to all the parents, or I couldn't figure out how to marry those two systems together. And so Edsby was what really brought those things together. And so Edsby has given us the opportunity for the students to use their own voice to communicate their progress and their next steps on Edsby, where we can see it and we can reflect back on it. We can look at it throughout the units. There's just
Mhm.
it opens a conversation at home, hopefully. I don't know if you and your daughter have conversations about that at home, but suddenly it's become the responsibility of the student to talk about their progress and what they're doing to move their learning forward. And it's become very, very sustainable. Like they are the ones that are talking about their learning and their goals, and it's not always coming from me. It doesn't need to be a teacher driven process. It needs to be a shared responsibility.
And I like that you praise it as shared responsibility. A couple things that I was writing down there is that it's a shift in that mindset of I'm not just here to listen to the teacher and do exactly what they tell me to do and just spit that back. I'm here to be thoughtful about the conversation that we're having with learning, and that it is a back and forth. And sometimes rather than give me the next step, you'll probably prompt me to think about what is my next
Yes.
step, right? You'll probably ask me a question, and that it's okay for me not to know the answer the moment that you ask me that, and that's part of taking time to reflect. And I think earlier you said I would give them feedback, but then we didn't do anything with it. So providing that time in the flow of the day, in the flow of the week, to look at that feedback and process it and think about it, come back to it and say, am I did I make progress on that? And certainly if I am not sure what my next step is. And when we talk about feedback, there's all levels of feedback, and that's the art of
Oh,
teaching is what's the feedback that the student needs in that moment. And so if I was genuinely struggling and really not sure what my next step would be, we would have a different conversation about where we're at and practice
yeah.
looking at those strategies and things like that.
And that's what's guiding our next steps in the classroom as well. So after I've looked through like any sort of assessment information, um, that is what's guiding what we're going to do next. Do I need to work with this particular group of students? Do these are these students capable of working on some problems? Can these students help each other out? And so not only is formative assessment important for the students, but it's also guiding what I'm doing as a teacher to make sure that I'm meeting the needs of all of my students. It's helping me form groups. It's helping me decide what my assignment is going to be for tomorrow. Do we need to review something? It really guides the conversation so that everything's not that we, of course, we're having informal, fun conversations in the classroom, but it really makes the time that we have together, because we know that's very precious, it makes the time that we have together purposeful. And so we can have a conversation right away about the things that we need to be talking about versus other things that might be superfluous to the situation.
You just described the art and science of teaching is knowing where your students are at. Formative assessment is a way that we tap into what students know, where they're at in that moment, and formulate the plan for tomorrow. So we're recording this at the end of the day. So Darla's taken in and processed where students are at on an ongoing basis all day, and she's shaping what does tomorrow look like? How are the groupings going? Are we ready to step into the next piece? How are we going through all of that? But that is formative assessment is always happening in the classroom. What we're talking
Absolutely.
about is digging into that, shifting the responsibility to the students to becoming an active participant, to learning to use their voice, which increases student agency. And student agency or agency for any of us is our belief in ourselves that we can take that information that we're learning or that we're doing at work, and that we can make a difference with that, that my voice matters in that conversation. And I'm empowered to do something about my
Yeah.
own learning. Right, and that's the
Yeah.
ultimate goal in shifting that conversation.
Absolutely.
Y So we were talking about student agency, and the conversation can shift that, and that's the power of formative feedback, so that it's not about a mark, it's about where am I now, where am I going to next? And you talked about teacher time, which is really important, and I know some of the questions that I think all teachers might be wondering about is, okay, marks can be a way to certainly communicate where a student is at. How do you handle, you probably see 100 students in a day. How do you handle feedback
for that many students, and what might it look like?
Yeah, I think and that was one of the big questions that I had too when I first was kind of going down this journey. I tried to make everything I tried to be very purposeful in the things that I take in to provide feedback. So I am consistently referencing what exactly is it that I need these students to be able to do, what they need to know, what is our success criteria, what does it look like? What do I need them to have before we move on? And so I'm trying to be very strategic about what I provide feedback on. I'm not just marking things for the sake of marking them, which I think we can sometimes get in the rut of like, oh, I guess we did that lab, so I guess I better mark it. I don't know. I try to be strategic. That's the first thing. So the second thing is I try to encourage the students to ask for feedback before they submit something to me. So for example, if I am doing a lab report, there that was something that I was like, "Oh boy, like there's a lot of ways I could go here. There's a lot of things that I could give feedback on these lab reports." So I tried to adjust my thinking by saying, "Okay, what do the students I need the students to identify what do they already feel confident in? Because maybe I'm telling them something they already know. And what is it that they want feedback on? What do they feel unsure about?" And so something that I might do is I might give them a sticky note, and just on that sticky note, they write down, like, "Here's what I feel really good about. I don't need you to tell me anything about my data table. Feel good about that. But what I do want feedback on is my conclusion. Like, here's specifically where I feel unsure, and that's where I need your help." And so not only does that really increase the student's agency and the student's metacognition, it also focuses my attention and my ability to respond to them very efficiently and quickly because I'm not sifting through the entire lab reports. I'm just going straight to their conclusion, and that is what we're focusing on.
And I think you said a really key word there. It's purposeful and it's intentional, and you're very strategic in what you need the feedback on. And so in my head, I'm thinking about we often talk about triangulation of data. And so you've got the strong grounding in the curriculum. What are those success criteria? And by success criteria, we mean how do I know that the student knows? And how do they show me what they know? And so that comes from the Ministry of Education. And so we have that strong grounding in the curriculum. You know, as a teacher, sort of where we are on that path, but you've also added the student voice into that piece. So you're looking at, we know this is the target to where we're going. Here's what the student is identifying they need some specific support with. And I know that this is
Yes.
the direction. So you're heading them in that direction and giving them the feedback they need. And we don't need to, I know when I was talking with Dan Milkey the other day, and he said, sometimes I don't need a full exam to go through and get the information that I have.
Totally.
I already have it. We've had
Yeah.
conversations. I've observed them doing it. I have examples. They might have had something, a smaller product that they created. They might reflect on a couple very specific questions at that point.
Yes.
So assessment can continue to evolve through that. And again, you're activating that student voice and teaching them how to be more reflective in thinking about how they're learning, because it's not just about learning the content, it's about learning how to learn. And sometimes for us,
Yes.
that means unlearning some things to help us relearn how to do some of the new things. And I think that's probably, I think it's Alvin Toffler that said the three skills you need to survive in the 21st century are the ability to learn, unlearn, and relearn. And so for all of us, it's a work in progress. And I think you've described a few times through the podcast how I started with this and it's evolved into this. And now we try it like that. And so that it's an ongoing learning experience. So wherever you are in your teaching journey, in your reflecting on assessment, it's being thoughtful about that. It's like you said, pausing to think instead of a number or a rubric score, what if I added feedback? What if I asked a question rather than just giving the feedback? What is it that that student needs in this context to ignite that thinking and help them to move forward? And we fully acknowledge upfront, like you said, it's not an overnight process. We don't just walk in and all of a sudden you're getting extremely detailed reflections that are moving students forward. But I did want to ask, because I know in conversations with Rianne, you've talked to her about when we think about students, we know that some students struggle more with certain types of learning than others. And so one of the questions I think people might have is, I have a student that does really well in math, So they probably are they able to reflect well? Do they use feedback better? Does it help students who are struggling? So is this a strategy that actually supports and are you seeing progress at all levels of learning? So regardless of where I am in the learning continuum, is this a skill set that will help me to move forward? We might not all move, we're all moving
One,
in the same direction, but we may not all be at the same point, if that makes sense.
yes, 1000%. And I, it, I think that's always just been, that's the heart of teaching, right? Is we always want our learners to move forward and learn more, grow. What can they communicate today that they couldn't communicate yesterday? What questions are they asking now? And I think the best part of all of this is that I can very specifically reach each of the students and push them in a direction that makes sense for them. I had, I can think in particular, had a student in my pre-calc 20 class. Brilliant student, loves to do math, would dig into every equation um, that I've given to him. And I wasn't quite sure like how he was going to respond when I asked him to reflect. And the response that he gave me floored me. What he wrote down, it totally surprised me. He said, I'm going to be looking for some, I can't remember exactly what it was, but I wasn't expecting him to be as reflective as he was. And I think the other opportunity here is that we get to hear from students that maybe they don't like to talk about their learning around other students. And so giving them an opportunity to maybe write something down or put it in Edsby or something like that, I can hear their voices a lot more. I have a student in one of my grade 9 classes that his reflection just really impressed me. I learned so much more from him and where he thought he was. Like I learn a lot about the students and it always impresses me in terms of how every single student, regardless of where they are along that continuum, they
Mhm.
all have something to say about their learning and what they can do to move forward, whether we have to help them read their feedback or we have a conversation instead of them writing something down in their progress charts. There's ways to help everybody move forward. And I think that's exactly what we want. That's our goal.
Yes, and that was my wonder. Do you see the progress? And you just highlighted that not only do you see students reflecting on what they're doing in math, you actually have a better understanding of them as a learner. And the more information that
Mhm.
you have as a teacher to know the context and the background, the better able you are to shape and invite students into that learning. And I think the other piece you said was you've created that space for their voice. And I think that, like you said, is the heart of teaching. We want to hear from our students. The students have amazing ideas. They are our future. They are the ones that are going to solve all the problems that our generation and the previous
Yes.
generations have created. So we really want them to be thoughtful about how they approach different things, to have that personal efficacy that I can figure this out and I can try it. And
Yes.
maybe it didn't work out, but that's okay because I figured out how it didn't work. And that's my stepping stone to learning how it might work. Or I might try the next theory that maybe that didn't work, but I keep going and I know that it's okay. And I'm resilient enough to know that learning is not a straight linear path from, here to I have it perfectly. It's all of those different pieces along the way. It's that journey, that those conversations, the aha moments when you can tell that. I always say you can see those light bulb moments when somebody's like,
Yeah.
that makes sense now. I have the connection for these two pieces. So you've highlighted a number of really important things there.
Thank you for joining us as we reflected on the power of feedback and reflection and the impact of shifting students from compliant to drivers of their own learning. Thank you to Darla for sharing how to set the tone for feedback and progress tracking on day one, making sure assessment is a shared responsibility between teacher and student. In this episode, we explored how using success criteria helps make feedback more meaningful, fostering student metacognition, and leveraging tools like Edsby to bridge the communication gap between school and home. The heart of this discussion is empowering students, not just to learn content, but to learn how to learn, to reflect on their progress, and to take actionable next steps. It's about creating lifelong learners who see challenges as opportunities to grow. In Part 3, we'll dive even deeper into how formative assessment and feedback can support students across different levels of learning and abilities. We'll reflect on the larger impact this work has on shaping resilient, thoughtful individuals. Until then, thanks for listening, and if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and share it with others who might find it valuable. And as always, we'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a review or connect with us to continue the conversation. See you in Part 3. Thank you for joining our community of innovators and change makers. We hope the conversations and stories have ignited a spark within. We'd like to express our gratitude to our dedicated Northeast educators. Until next time, remember to subscribe to Any Voices and join us on the next episode as we share the stories of learning shaping our future. Thanks for listening.